Um, I've done this a few times, and it started sort of because I'm a member of AAUW, and I read the research. I've been on the state board. I'm the co-president right now with Jandy Young, and I'm so glad to see, is Jan here? No, but Lila Bloom is, who's a life member of AAUW. She graduated in '61, and some of you had her husband Harlow for art. They're my mentors and my dear friends. Gene Liebman was the president of AAUW state of Illinois in the late 50s, and when we graduated, we all got a card to become AAUW members, which I didn't do till 1992, because I kept saying, well, when my daughters are grown and out of the house, I will join. About 8 years ago, we started a series on, the PIFIs and the Women's Studies program started a series on the F word. Now, you probably know what the F word is, but the crowd was so big the first night that it was clear that a lot of the kids on campus didn't know what the word was. And I was sitting next to a young man, and I said, so why are you here? He said, the dean is going to talk about the F word. And I said, oh, you're going to be in for a big surprise. So, I don't think of feminism as a dirty word, but I do think of feminism as one of the issues of the last 50 years. I would first ask you to please silence your cell phones. They haven't been invented yet. Neither has PowerPoint, and because I had no clue what they were going to say or what I was going to really ask them after what they said, I couldn't do a PowerPoint, even though I have done them. And if I need to write anything, I'll use the blackboard behind me. Oh, did any of you teach with a smart board? Yeah, great invention, but I don't miss it. We had it made in some ways. Life was much simpler, and because we were not interconnected to every minute of every day of the latest gossip or whatever, we also had our heads in the sand, which was also much simpler. When we showed up in the fall of 1962 on a campus that you've probably hardly been on yet over that way, it was the first year of the 3-3 plan, which some of you liked and some of us hated. Every class was worth the same credit, whether it involved 8 hours of lab a week and meant 5 days, or whether it meant twice a week. It took a long time, though, for the faculty to decide to get rid of it. The fact that the whole country didn't pick up on the 3-3 plan probably says something about its inadequacies. It was also the first year of deferred rush. So that was good because our women bonded, and that's been one of the great things as we've come back. Those bonds still exist. What we're looking at today are some of the doors that were open to us and the ceilings that have been raised, and how our lives changed and your lives changed. And yes, as the women's lives changed, so did the guys. So yes, I am Donna Schlifke. I was a freshman religion major from Prairie Village, Kansas. And for those of you who know me, you probably are saying, religion? Because I switched majors the end of the second term, and when my dear friend Stafford Weeks, because we came back at 68 and have been here forever, so I knew all those professors as dear friends later. But when my dear friend Stafford Weeks took me over to Milton Bowman and handed my files, Milton Bowman said, I had seen the light. But it was actually because I'd been taking philosophy with the wonderful Sam Thompson, another very dear person, and I was clueless. So it was much easier to memorize biology than to think philosophically. Well, here are our brave panelists, and they're going to do the same thing. They're going to tell you where they came from, their major, and what do they want to be when they grow up? In other words, when they came as freshmen, what was their life plan? They have not heard that.
This is a trick. By the way, I sat here so Betty could sit here and start. Okay, so this is a retrospective. 1962. I had no idea what I was doing in college. I wanted to be here. I loved to learn. I remember I was the oldest of 3. And when I started kindergarten, first grade, I would come home and my parents had a green blackboard at home, and I would teach my brother and sister the things I had learned that day. They were very good students. They paid attention. We ate peanut butter and crackers and went out for recess and just had a good time. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but then, I'm sorry, I know I want to be a teacher, 1962. But there's so much to learn. And in my first year, I had 5 majors. I loved everything. There was biology, Latin, religion, I think, history, and then I settled on English. But I knew I wanted to be a teacher.
I'm Betty Frank Fridley. I always have to stop for a minute because in this world I'm Frank. I am from Aledo, Illinois, so I was only about 25 miles from home. My father was a student here at Monmouth, and I always wanted to come here to school. Applied to other places, but I had a chemistry teacher in high school by the name of Margaret Miles, who found me and said, I can help you get to Monmouth College if that's where you want to go. And I know that she's helped many others from my area come to Monmouth. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but I chose physical education because I didn't think I'd have to take a foreign language. Surprise, Dr. Serrano was here at the time, remember him? And the final was, you had to speak to him in Spanish. I sweated bullets, but I made it through. But through different activities here on campus, I chose the profession of a physical education major. I've taught physical education and English in various schools, but my true love was the arts, although I didn't know that at the time. And my career was as an arts council director in planning and programming and raising funds and sweeping the floor and those kinds of things. But it was one of those professions that I just fell into, not knowing at the time when I was here that that's what I really wanted to do. But the things you learn here prepare you for any kind of vocation that you choose or profession.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm Barb Bachman-Killey, and I came here for all the wrong reasons. My parents were driving us around. I'm the oldest of 3 also, and looking at colleges. And when I got here, I met Susie Wickert right off the bat, and she took me under her wing and showed me around. This is like one afternoon. I thought, she is the nicest person I ever met, and this is the nicest place, and I just love it, and I'm going to come here. I always said I wanted to be a social worker due to an unfortunate camping experience that I had at an evangelical camp where you had to get up and profess your faith and say what you were going to do with your life with your faith. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? So I thought social worker sounded like something that would work at an evangelical camp. But I didn't even look at the faculty. Turns out it was a 1-woman social work department. Remember that Madge Sands? And she hated me. And so I told my dad I wanted to switch to the U of I, and he said, well, if you want to pay for it, that's fine, but if you want me to pay for it, you're going to stay at that nice small Christian college. And so I switched to biology, which was a good move because I became lab partners with Frank, my husband. So, and I did do social work for a little while out of school until I realized that you almost have to have a master's degree to do that, to really do anything in it. And I got accepted at the University of Chicago and then got married and didn't go.
Hi, my name is Trudy Trenner, and when I came to Monmouth in 1962, I had no idea what I wanted to be either. I just knew I wanted a college education. I thought maybe I'd be a lawyer, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I just wanted to go to college because nobody else in my family had ever gone to college. And so this was a really big deal. I came to Monmouth because one of my friends from church was here as a freshman, and I came to visit, and I just loved it. I never looked at another school, and I never regretted it for a minute. While I was here, I was a French and history major, and I had an opportunity because of my French professor to spend a summer in France as an au pair. And when I came back, I really knew how to speak French, even though when I went, I was surprised that I didn't know how to do anything, even though I'd taken years and years and years of French. And it actually was very helpful to my career going forward because I've actually had a chance to work in France, to teach in France, and to have some really nice experiences because you never know what you're going to learn here, and it sometimes turns out in ways you didn't know, but that are very helpful.
They all have longer stories, we'll get back to that. But since we're in 1962 to 6 at this point, I want to talk a minute about the rules. If you could compare life on the campus in 1979 to 1962 to 66, it was like night and day. In fact, the second year we were here, Mike was the head resident at Gibson Hall, and I was his official roommate. I was the only person that was legally living with a person of the other sex, although now we say gender. But anyway, I saw a young woman going into a guy's room, and the problem with Gibson Hall was it had lots of outside doors, so that was easy. Well, within about 6 months, the college did let members of the opposite sex have visitation rights, although they were still strictly controlled. But as we're talking about rules, I will tell you this is the 66 version, but yes, I know the class of 56 would say it was like a nunnery. I know the class of 61 had oppressive rules because the seniors told us it used to be much worse. And I did get a letter from a sorority daughter in 67, 68, which was the year before we came back. She said, AWS met, threw out all the rules and dissolved the organization, and Dean Jean had apoplexy. Now there are members of the class of 71 here today who I know, I actually knew them then, they don't remember that happening. But I think it must have. At least it's a great story. So while we're in rules, can you remember any of them?
Yeah. I remember we had to be in the dorms at 10, and we had weekend hours, maybe a couple of 11 o'clocks or 12 o'clocks. And after I met a nice young man who took me to the river one night and said he knew a shortcut on the way home, and we didn't get there, I got my first campus for not being in on time, but I later married him, so it's okay. Oh, and we could not wear slacks unless the dean had called and it was so cold that skirts would not be acceptable.
You took all my words. I know in Dr. Bowman's class, if you weren't there on time, he slammed the door and you didn't get in. That was his rule. I can't.
Well, I didn't experience this, but I'd like to, I know Barb Hoovy has one, and maybe Trudy has something else to add.
Let me take the mic to Barb. I want to take Barb Ballard. Barb Ballard came from Prairie Village with me. We went to kindergarten. I don't think kindergarten, but we went to grade school together. And in her bio, she shares this, so it's recorded for posterity. Barb, tell them the rule.
Oh, the messy room rule? Oh my God, I thought I was getting away from that. I didn't know Dean Jean came through and she gave you a campus for a messy room. I just couldn't get over it. I had to leave here because of all the rules and other reasons, but it was 8 o'clock, not, as a freshman.
I actually went and got all the Scots guides. They're in the archives if you want to see them. They're bound. But we had to be in at 9. I double checked. If we had a grade point of 3.0, we had to be in at 10 the third term. We had midnight on Friday and Saturday. If you had a formal, like a prom, like we didn't call them that, you could stay out till 1. I think it was 11 o'clock on Sunday. You had to sign in and out of the dorm. You couldn't shower after 11:30. At night. Now, the next question, and the alcohol rules were incredible. It's interesting that Barb said that because I always really wondered why she left me here. We came here together. Anyway, I now have a question for the guys. Bill Woolma, what were your rules?
None.
Does any boy or man in here disagree? Your rules were none.
Well, not totally true.
Oh, okay, just a minute. Oh, my exercise. Dick Young.
One of the rules that I distinctly remember was that if you were caught underage drinking, you were out of school. So there were those, particularly the upperclassmen, who periodically ventured down to Gulfport, which was Sin City then. There was live music and wild women and all sorts of other things. But the deal was, if you happened to be apprehended down there, you had a choice. It was either $100 or they would call the school. So there were periodically those calls back to various fraternity houses about the need for $100.
Now we know the rest of the story. Huh?
Oh, okay. You have to tell us who you are, because I don't know, but I might know you, but whoops.
Yeah, I'm Paul Moy, class of 61. I don't know if this is a rule, but language is a problem. I was living in Fulton Hall, and I had some friends that were going to school at Macomb. And I never carried a schedule with me. That's why my picture doesn't ever show in the yearbook, because I forgot all our pictures. Anyway,
Didn't come here.
they had come over to meet me. They were supposed to pick me up at Fulton Hall, this group from Macomb College that went from my hometown, and I wasn't there. I forgot. And they put a little note on the board or form that said, "Where in the blank line were you?" Well, who was the head of the Fulton Hall then? It was Dr. Phillips or Phillips?
Frank Phillips.
That's right, Frank Phillips. Well, he saw that note, and you talk about apoplexy. He called the president of Macomb, and he had those boys never to come to Monmouth College again. Now, that's pretty serious.
You actually have 2 rules in the Scots Guide. One is that you had to be quiet in the dorm after 7:30, and you did have to let the college know if you were going to be gone overnight. Now, let's just hear hands. How many women think this was probably unfair? At the time, that the men had no rules and we had lots of them. Yeah, Susan's saying we had to have a lot of permissions. We also had rules about cars and so on. It's interesting that you didn't all raise your hand, so I have to tell you that one of the questions I was asked when I talked about my own journey from where I was to where I am now, I had a lot of college girls come up to me afterwards and they said to me, "Why did you go along with them?" Which is a very interesting question, and I'm going to hand the mic to the girls and ask how they would have answered the question.
Well, first, I think Al had a comment, right?
You can say whatever you want, but that's my question.
I was just going to say say that
I gotta give them the mic because people can't hear. Okay. I should have hired a runner.
That's all right. You talked about rules for the men. Well, our freshman year, we had a very well orchestrated, well planned, major penny raid, where a couple of the young ladies propped open the doors to let us in. And who were those guys in the green uniforms who chased us all over the arena? Custodians, right. They let it be known after that anybody that did it in the future was out of school.
I think there were others, though. Okay, you remember what my question was? Because I don't, but
How did we handle
How
the
would you
rules?
respond to those girls who said, you know, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you react to it? Why did you go along with it?
Oh, I don't think we did like it, but I don't remember any channel, any group, any women's committee, any approach that we could take to challenge them. There might have been, perhaps it was up to us, but I don't remember there was an avenue to say, that's not fair.
I imagine it would have been Dean Jean, and none of us would have approached that. I came from a rather strict home, so it was a rule, and I accepted that.
I don't think I ever saw that sign that said question authority until I was an adult. And, but our kids saw it from the time they were little.
Yeah. And I really didn't think too much about inequities until it came time to get jobs. And that's when it first hit me that things were not fair.
yes.
Who? You, Ralph. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were pointing at somebody.
I'm going to file a minority report here. Student Center Director had students who were telephone operators. They were talking about lengthening hours. And one of my gals said, I don't want to lengthen my hours. I'll just have to stay out another hour and wrestle with that guy another hour longer.
And Susan Cosrich and I both ran switchboard. It was the old, Lily Tomlin type. And we couldn't wait till it was whatever the closing time at switchboard was, because we wanted to go home and, do whatever. So yeah, I can understand that. Yeah. And I was the head duty girl at Mike my junior year, and so I've seen both sides of this. Having to be the one who sort of questioned, but also had to enforce. So I was at one point called the genuine bitch. Okay, we gotta move on or we'll be with the rules all day. Okay, what we talked about this was the connection between our mothers and our daughters and how that impacted us. I want you all to tell me about your mother. Was she college educated, and what did she do? Now we could share this with the whole audience, but let's just give a sampling of these people.
No, my mother was not college educated. In fact, I was the first in my family as well to get a college education. The first of my grandmother's 13 grandchildren. Both of them worked in the home, with the exception that my grandmother, at the age of 12 in 1900, had to quit school to go to work in the Chicago printing press, big factory where she handled huge rolls of paper, and did that for about 2 years to support her family before she herself got married, and then raised 6 children while her husband went to work. But other than that, I had no real role model in terms of getting a college education or actually having a profession. I just knew that I wanted to do that.
My mother was a stay-at-home mom. I grew up on a farm, so she was Dad's assistant in many ways. Not college educated. Dad had 3 years of college. I always had the desire, but I had to really struggle with my mother. In order to go on to college, I needed to be a secretary or a nurse or those things. Teacher was the other one, but that wasn't in her vocabulary. So it was a little bit of a battle. My dad was very supportive, having been here to Monmouth, but my mother was not, but we worked around that.
My mother grew up very, very poor, but a neighbor sent her and her two sisters to college, which was wonderful. They all went to Miami of Ohio. And she became a teacher and taught for about 2 years until she had kids, and then didn't teach again until we were practically grown. So that was sort of their expectation too. My father thought that women who worked after they had children were loose women or something, I guess.
And my mother was not college educated, but my mother was a very good role model for me about what I did not want to be in my life. Because she was a stay-at-home mom, and it wasn't because of her choice. It was because there were no opportunities for her to work. There was no child care. She couldn't support herself because she had no education and she had no skills. So I knew that that was not the life I wanted. So when I came to college, it was specifically with the desire to get a better life than the life my mother had, and a very different life.
My mother was a college graduate, born in 1913, and didn't meet my father till 1927. She was the director of advertising for a large Kansas City department store, and she gave it up when she got married. All of you who know me well know my mother died at age 39 when she didn't wake up from surgery. It was a DNC, and so it was a total shock, and of course, talk about life-changing events. Because I had such a short time with her, I had an incredible conversation with her in the summer of 1952, which was about 3 months before she died. I can't remember the circumstances, but my father was, I guess I'd say he liked educated arm candy. He wanted dinner on the table and, you know, the house picked up, and my mother was still writing. She was a journalist. She was still writing. And we had to go somewhere because he had to have something done. And she's saying as we're in the car, he needs to learn to do it for himself. He expects too much. So I was, even though I didn't have this mother after that, I was very much aware that there were conflicts. When you're talking about limited career choices, I hope we remember airline stewardess, beautician, and what, do we forget any others? Oh, yeah, and also you could be a sales clerk. Well, as Barb and I were talking as this sort of evolved, and we were really looking for a single member of our class to speak, but I was reading the bios that were slowly coming in. Come on, people, start sharing your lives. And we didn't have a rocket scientist, you know, we had a PhD directly out of school, but she wasn't coming. So that's when we decided to have this panel. And I decided I really needed to read, for the first time in my life, The Feminine Mystique, which was published in 1963. Did any of you ever read it? Yes. Okay. If you read it, you know it wasn't really about you, it was about your mother. Betty Friedan was born in Peoria. Her family ran a jewelry store. She was born at 21 and graduated from Smith in 1942, and at her 15th reunion from Smith, she gave all these women questionnaires. And she was astounded by their answers and realized they all had a problem that had, what she says, the problem with no name. That women of that generation were basically unhappy. They were living in suburbia, they had all the appliances, they had lots of children, the birth rate was up, and they had very limited expectations, and they were frustrated when they would write down on forms, occupation housewife. The thing that relates to our generation was that she says in the book that I'm really worried about the women who will be entering college in the 1960s. I see them as passive. They want to go to college to get their MRS and their PhD. Now, I have never shared this with anyone, So Barry, please don't record it for posterity. And I hope my application to Monmouth College has been burned. But I actually wrote in my application that I plan to marry a well-educated man as part of my grand scheme. So when I read this from Betty Friedan, I thought, oh my. So now my question is, to the panel, would you agree with Betty?
No. What more do you want?
Betty says you were gonna get your MRS and your PhD.
Oh, I remember several of my father's business associates who, when they learned that I was going to college and he would introduce me and, you know, she's been accepted to Monmouth and we're so proud of her. Oh, you're going to get your MRS degree. Nothing made me madder than to hear that, but I was raised to be polite and I didn't say anything, but that really, really irritated me because I did like to learn. I did want to get an education. So no, I don't agree with that. Now, it worked out. I got both degrees, but that was not my intention at all.
I'm not sure whether that was my intention or not. I was dating my high school sweetheart who was 2 years ahead of me and here at Monmouth already. But I knew I wanted a degree. I knew I wasn't wanting to get married before I had that degree. So whatever happened after that happened. I did marry my high school sweetheart, who I'm not married to today. And it all worked out in the long run, but I did end up marrying the guy.
I would have hotly denied that I was coming to get my MRS, but I probably in the back of my mind, I expected that that would happen. I know my sister, who is 2 years younger, did not meet her husband at Monmouth, and she felt like a total failure. Really, she did. I mean, it was weird.
Well, I didn't want to get married, so that was nothing in my mind when I came to Monmouth. That was absolutely the farthest thing from my mind because I'd seen marriage. I thought marriage was not nice. Fortunately, life has proved me wrong.
Anybody else want to take on that one?
What is a PhD?
Putting hubby through.
Okay, here's Janet. She didn't go to Monmouth, but she married Gwendolyn, who did.
I did get a PhD because when we were doing graduate work, the wives of the grad students made up their own diplomas. Instead of saying PhDs, we said PhDs.
I wonder what today's women would really think of that. It's an interesting observation. Okay, in the latest issue of the Monmouth magazine, now this is probably a real reflection on this whole issue. How many years has it been? 163 years we've been here. We finally get an issue about women. The cover girl is from the 90s, which to me isn't that far back. There is an article about an amazing woman from the 1890s from Gerlaw who was really in the first wave of feminism. But the article that I found very interesting is from Anne Gary. It's the back page. I'm not going to read it to you because you can do that. It's called In Pursuit of a Post-Feminist Society. She does have a PhD. She spoke last year and I didn't hear her, but I know they said she rambled a bit. But I think if you heard her, you should read this essay because it's really very interesting. I want to call it to your attention. I don't want to dwell on this question or we'll never get out of here. But she says in there that the 60s did not arrive at Monmouth while we were here. And would anyone like to comment on that?
There was one hippie and one beatnik. And I sat next to the hippie. There was one beatnik that I think graduated before we got here, and there was one hippie who sat next to me unbathed for a whole term or two. Remember the iron helmet he rode for? Pardon? Was it Bigger and Molly? I don't know who.
I think the hippie was our dear friend Ron Eichen. And he is our dear friend. And by the way, he's been fighting cancer. So that's one of the advantages if you've been here for 50 years. A lot of these people you still connect with. Yeah, and Ron went on to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he's still writing. So Yeah.
I think in our area in the 60s, the social justice issues came upon us. The civil rights issue was brewing. It was a racism issue with the few people of color on this campus. We also had to deal with the Vietnam War.
We did. So I do think they arrived. I think the comment most of us would make was we probably didn't know immediately where we stood. There's been interesting talk this weekend too about the remembering about the students that couldn't get haircuts. And I don't know if all of you long Monmouthians will remember this, but there were some boys on campus who made sure that those students could get haircuts. The local barber said they simply couldn't cut that kind of hair. I've never been a beautician, so I'm not sure what the issue would be. On a trip to Monmouth, England in 1969, it was then Monmouth, Wales, and it was a choir tour. The local Rotarians of Monmouth were entertaining part of this choir tour group. And I was wearing a bright red, sort of short dress because mini skirts were starting. And I was standing with the Rotarians while their wives were along the food table, somewhat subservient. I'm not making any judgment on these women. I'm just saying that was the description of how I would say it. And one of the men asked me if I was part of the women's lib movement. So I'm going to tell you in a minute what I answered, but I want these women to tell you how they would have answered the question.
Well, I had to read The Feminine Mystique in Adele Kennedy's class, so I was thinking about it, but I don't think I had an opinion yet.
I know I had no opinion. It was nothing that I could relate to.
Like Trudy, I didn't really feel discriminated against until I started looking for non-traditional jobs.
Yeah, and I felt exactly the same way. I've always felt that I was a feminist because I've always believed in the equality of women, and it was primarily around issues of employment. So I would have always said that I was a feminist from the first time I heard the word.
My answer was, I've been liberated since birth. And I remember saying that to them. We have a very interesting daughter who, in 8th grade, chose not to join the church, and she told our minister, it's brainwashing. And so at some point in my life, she said to me, Mom, you were brainwashed from birth. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. No, I wasn't liberated from birth, and I have to tell you, this was '69. I had been teaching science in a small school in Iowa before we came to Monmouth. I was the young woman teacher in a school that did not have athletics for girls. That was probably the only high school in Iowa that didn't. Girls' athletics were bigger than guys. They drew the crowds. These girls came to me thinking, we can change things. They said to me, will you help us get girls sports? Now remember, 2 years later, I say I'm liberated from birth. I'm a biology major. I'm teaching biology, chemistry, and physics. I say to them, it's not good for your reproductive system. This is true confession. Now, some of you do know the story of this daughter who says I was brainwashed from birth. At age 39, she became the world champion on the road for 100 kilometers, running the 4th fastest time of a North American woman at the distance. The first 5 times are held by the famous Ann Trayson, and Amy's 4th on the list after Ann. She ran 7:19 splits for 100 kilometers, that's 62 miles. Boy, have I had to eat those words, but I will tell you, her body has suffered, and she's had no children. But she's not married and has no plans to have children. And most of the injuries have been to the broken fingers and the lost toenails. Oh my, okay, here we go. So that leads me to my next question, and I'd like you all to chime in on this. Do you feel that not having competitive sports, which my daughters thrived on, do you think it was a detriment for us?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But anyone want to specifically address that? Do you guys agree too?
Yes.
Okay. I was taking a class for my master's, and it was on gifted education. And the professor was talking about the fact that at that time, that this would have been like the mid-'80s, he said that we do have one common factor among all highly successful people. They tend to have been involved in team activities. And when he said that, it was a real impact to me of what we had missed. Now, we had other team activities, plays, clubs, but it was this thing that sports gives us, this confidence, just like standing on the stage of a play, or in the case of teaching. Teaching does give you confidence. That's why I can bear my soul today. And you won't remember me. Yeah.
This is really not about competitive sports, but it's about being an athlete. And I absolutely had no athletic opportunities when I was in high school and or college. And so I didn't really start doing anything until I was maybe 31 when I started to run. And it was surprising to me that I actually had this physical ability, and I ran for years and loved it and did a marathon and just felt really, I felt better about myself when I knew that I had physical capabilities that I had never been given an opportunity to experience before. So it's not just about team, it's also just about self-confidence.
I'd like to address that from an employment situation, being in physical education, being educated in Illinois. Excuse me, there was very little in that education that taught me to coach. I moved to North Carolina, I couldn't coach. I didn't know the strategic anything about coaching. I moved to Missouri, I couldn't coach. I had opportunities for jobs. I didn't feel adequate. I turned the jobs down because I didn't feel adequate, not because they wouldn't hire me.
Well, I agree that we need that competition, that teamwork, but having been involved with theater for 18 years of my life, I have to speak up for that too. And I think that sense of teamwork, growth and self-confidence, appreciation of working with other people, is every bit as important in the theater arts as well. But I need to walk down here a minute. Okay, so we didn't have competitive women's sports at Monmouth College, but you have here two competitors. You may not know that we had a competitive badminton team at Blackburn College. Margie was the power and I was the sneak attack, and we won a trophy freshman year, right? And but the funny part of that, you'd think I would say that because that'd be so memorable, but I was going out, I don't know if it was with Larry or somebody else, but it was a kind of a formal, and the nail in the sole of my shoe started poking through, and I didn't have a hammer. So I had a trophy, and I used it to pound that nail in, and it split right in half. So sad story.
Okay, yeah, then I agree on the play, that's why I brought that up, being in theater, but in most schools, there's more options to be in sports, because there's so many sports, where the theater tends to be a more limiting number. But yes, I think we all agree that that's how we learn to interact with people. Okay, well now we're going to move on to their life after those early years, and so here they're going to sort of finish their story, which will lead me to the kinds of questions that are really the big issues today for all of us as we think about things like the wage gap and negotiating salaries and so on. So you're now going to finish your life story where you left off.
Graduating?
Well, you graduated, you told
I graduated. Yeah. Indeed, and it was a glorious day too. Life story. Well, there was this social issue called the Vietnam War, and Larry and I had married the year that when he graduated in '65. I had one more year left to serve at the college. He served in the Army, went on to officer candidate school, and then I followed him to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I followed him to Fort Lewis, Washington, where I did some substitute teaching. I think I found, the first time I stepped into a classroom, this is where I belong, and that felt really good, and I'm glad I had that opportunity in that year. But when he went to Vietnam, I was very fortunate that I was able to land a teaching job at Carlinville Junior High School. Some of those students are now among my good friends in Carlinville. And I taught there until he came back, thankfully. Then we went out west to Colorado. Larry went to law school. I pursued my master's. And the interesting thing about that was Larry knew he wanted to go to law school and he was getting his degree. I was still a little fuzzy. I love to learn, so okay, I could take some courses toward my master's while I was working at the college as an administrative assistant in the English department. So I did, and after a year I had half of a master's. So I thought, well, why not? Why not finish? And the chairman of the department said to me, Barbara, your husband's going to law school. Think about what his career might be. Wouldn't you be more helpful to him if you had a graduate degree as well? So I did it. Good advice, wrong reason. You know, not understanding that, well, maybe I would have something to offer too, but it still was good advice, and I took it, and that led to when we, after we raised our 4 children, came back to Carlinville, and I've been able to teach at the college there, thanks to having my master's degree, so it all worked out.
That's a good story. I graduated from Monmouth actually had my academics done in 3 years by going to summer school, and finished my student teaching in November of '65. I was married in December of '65 and followed my husband to St. Louis, where he was in dental school. While in St. Louis, I need to back up. I came from Mercer County, just north of here. There was one African-American family in that county. I taught in an inner city school in St. Louis where there were 2 white faces. Everyone else was African-American. It was a very poor area. I didn't live in that area. I lived downtown, but traveled there, and it was one of the most educational experiences in my life. I am not a person that shows prejudice, and I didn't realize that until I was explaining to one of my colleagues who is this teacher that I had seen in the hallway, and they asked me if he was black or white, and I couldn't tell her whether he was black or white. It was a shock to me to realize that I wasn't prejudiced. I'd never been presented with a situation. But anyway, I taught there for 2.5 years when Fred finished dental school, and I did the PhD thing. Then he went into the military. We were in North Carolina at Camp Lejeune. He was a Navy dentist. While there, they drafted their physical education teachers, so they were looking for someone, and I thought, oh yeah, I'll try this. So it was an interesting experience in that those schools in North Carolina on the base are all rooms with outside access because it rains maybe once in a while, and there's not cold. So they would send 90 first graders to me, and I had an asphalted area smaller than this whole room that I was to teach these children on. But I was fulfilling a requirement. So I taught there for a couple of years, kindergarten through grade 6. And that too, being exposed to military dependent children is it broadened my life. Some of these children were very adjusted to the movement of their families every few years, and others weren't. And your heart broke for them. But you did the best you could in helping them get through their day. And from there, Fred went to Vietnam. We were transferred to Gulfport, Mississippi. At that point, he was attached to a CB base, and they had been going to Vietnam, and they again went. He was gone for about 7 months. I went back home to Aledo, taught in the Winona School District, Viola, New Windsor area, taught English and physical education, but unfortunately got pregnant before he left. So I finished the school year in April. He came home in about 8 days from Vietnam. He was in one of the first callbacks. So we started our life from that point on. He had made contact with some dentists in Farmington, Missouri, which is about an hour south of St. Louis, before he left for Vietnam. And so when we came back, he had taken only the Missouri boards. So that's where we ended up, only because that's where he had the board ready to go, the licensure ready to go. So we were there for 4 or 5 years. Eric, the oldest child, was 2 months when we moved there. We had another child, and shortly thereafter decided we needed to live our separate lives. He is still there. I stayed, was a mother for a couple of years, decided I needed a job. I wasn't fulfilled. Had an opportunity to be a secretary at a Presbyterian church, having had only 1 semester of typing in high school. The minister was very patient. And it was before computers at the church, so we had typewriters. So when I did the daily bulletin, Sunday bulletin, it was done many times before it was correct. From that, and then I had an opportunity through an acquaintance at the church who was the dean at the local community college, and said, we have a pilot program that we need somebody to organize and help us take throughout the state. So I was hired at that time, but before that, I had an opportunity to not only be a secretary at the church, but to develop a physical education program at the local Catholic school. So I was working 2 jobs. I had a child in elementary school and one in kindergarten, and I, at noontime, would switch him from one place to the other and go on about my day. And that was a help that get me back into the teaching career. But then when the dean at the college said, we think maybe you can help us in this program, that was my opening the door to the community college lifestyle, which I loved. It was only 6 miles away. I helped with these pilot programs and traveled the state a while. My title was project director, and that meant whatever came up, that was my job. But I learned a lot, and I learned to know a lot of people. And then there was the president of the college was interested in music, and he was able to arrange for the St. Louis Symphony to come to the campus for a concert. He developed from that a little club that was to bring special events to the college once a year, cultural events. And I looked at that, and I was playing in a community orchestra at the time, and I thought, you know, I might like to help out with this. So by that time, the group had dwindled to about 4 people, and they saw a new blood, a new face, and they said, you're our president. So I did that for a couple of years, and we learned that there was opportunity to get funding from the state of Missouri. So we had to have an executive director. And I very hesitantly applied, thinking that there would be all kinds of applicants. And I'm not sure whether there were or not, but I got the job. And so for 25 years, I worked in that profession, from starting with raising, at that time it was probably $30,000 to get the symphony there once a year. And it was all hands on deck kind of thing. I had a board that was very supportive, and the president of the college was very supportive. So we had to raise our own money, but the college provided the facilities, which is what continued through the 25 years I was there. The symphony actually got to the point we couldn't afford it, but we had a program of about 12 or 15 activities, including music, art, lectures. We had a Shakespeare festival, all kinds of things, to a very rural area in Missouri. So it was fun. I had great people to work with, and I retired in 2011. I missed the people. The job became overwhelming, and they hired somebody and split the job up. It took 3 people to replace me, so I pat myself on the back occasionally.
I just want you to say one more thing. Do you remember what you told me when we were talking about this, and how we really don't want to say that the vocations that were considered traditional women's vocations are lesser or anything. You said something about what you felt like you gained from teaching that allowed you to actually run, develop and run a big organization. The skills of managing a classroom. That's a management job that is really a difficult. I haven't done it myself, but I believe that it is probably how many people in their first management job manage 30 people.
I have to add one
How many of
thing.
you spent your careers as teachers?
I have to remind myself, I forgot to introduce my husband over there of 3 years. He has taken on a major project because I was single for 38.
Well, I became a social worker on the south side of Chicago in one of the high-rise housing projects, Robert Taylor Homes. And I had a similar experience with you. All of my clients in this one 18-story building, I had 100 families that were on welfare. All were African American. All of the social workers in my office were college graduate African Americans, except for one, so I didn't see her that often. And I remember going into the bathroom and looking at my face in the mirror and going like, oh my God, you kind of forget that you're not the same as everybody else. So after Frank and I got married, that was a year later, I robbed the cradle, he's a year younger. We moved to Wisconsin for a short while, and I lucked into a social work job there. They had a 5-person department, and somebody left, and we moved up for the summer only because he was going to have to go into the military too. And my entire caseload there was white. And I thought, it's the same, it's the same problems. It's lack of education, it's the same people, but it was a good experience in understanding, a lot of our basis for racial prejudice is wrong reasons. But after Frank got out of the service, I got a job in Waukesha, Wisconsin. He became a pharmaceutical representative. We were both biology majors. And I got pregnant, and this was during the era when women had to quit their jobs. You remember that, right? And I didn't want to quit my job. I thought that was really stupid. I had easy pregnancies. I wasn't sick. Nothing was wrong. I asked why we had to quit. You were supposed to quit at 6 months. And they said, well, driving is dangerous for women when they're pregnant. And my doctor, bless his heart, wrote a note saying that my due date was about 3 months later than it was. Actually, it was about 2. I mean, he was really brave. And so I didn't actually have to quit until 8 months, but it still frosted me. And I thought about filing a suit. I didn't do it, but someone else did it. And about a year after that, it was changed on a federal basis that was not legal. So I had another child, and then Frank decided that being a drug peddler wasn't what he wanted to do his whole life, and needed a graduate degree to do research or other things in biology. So we did the PhD thing too, but I couldn't get back into social work because it was there were budget cuts and they didn't have a spot, and you weren't allowed to just take a leave of absence. You had to quit when you had a kid. And so a neighbor of mine said, why don't you apply at IBM? I'm like, I don't know anything about computers. Why would I apply at IBM? He said, oh, they like to train people. And it turned, I remember talking to the branch manager to call and see if I could, get an appointment to be interviewed. And he said, well, you know, what experience have you had? And I said, well, I've been changing diapers the last couple of years. I don't know if I didn't want the job or what, but luckily, I was a beneficiary of a lawsuit against IBM that forced them to hire something other than white males. And yes, this was in 1974. And so I really was very lucky. They did like to train people, and I became a systems engineer, and you felt like you were getting a master's degree in, you know, in computing, because they would send you away for so long. I mean, one of the classes was 6 weeks long in New York, another one was 4 weeks long in Georgia, and it was a good job, and I don't think I might have stayed in that job the rest of my life if we hadn't left Wisconsin. After Frank got out of school, his degree was in, I want to say physiology, but that wasn't it. Yeah, that was it. But he had focused on eye research. And there is not a lot of eye research going on in Milwaukee. They make beer and motorcycles. And so we moved to California, and there was a company called Allergan that did focus on eye research. Some of you probably use their saline solutions for your contact lenses and things. Now, they're famous for Botox. But I got a transfer with IBM, and I had never thought about this in Illinois. Oh, when I was applying at IBM, I thought, well, I might as well apply at other computer types of companies too. Maybe that's a good career. I remember walking in the door at Honeywell and saying, you know, I'd like to apply for a job. And she said, the woman at the desk said, we don't have any secretarial positions open. And so after we got to California, I realized that women could actually have businesses. I had never even thought of it. But there was a very much more of an, I don't know, entrepreneurial feeling in California than I felt in the Midwest. And so after a year at IBM, one of my clients asked me if I would like to do some programming for them, and it started me in a computer software business, which is a wonderful business because you are learning all about different people's companies and then turning that business into something they can do on a computer. And so it never got boring. Well, it did get a little boring after about 20 years. And I had a partner that, well, you could say we didn't get along. One time she threw her purse at me across the room and hit me. Yes, so we dissolved our partnership. But hearkening back to my social work days, I had wondered about the child protection laws because I worked in a protective services unit at one point and had law school in the back of my mind. So at age 52, Frank got his PWT degree, would that be it? Yeah. And I went to law school. And really wish I had done it before then. That was a wonderful career. I worked for the city of Oakland, and somebody came up today and said, tell me about that medical marijuana permitting that you did. It was a very interesting job, but the most fulfilling part was actually being able to write legislation. The city council, cities are a place where you can really make a difference, you know, as opposed to like the federal government is so far removed from people's lives. But we got an outdoor smoking ordinance enacted because a bunch of kids came to the city council saying that they had to take public buses to school and that people were always smoking at the bus stops, and you know that really bothered them, and the council took it to heart, and so I wrote a law that banned smoking at bus stops and in bank lines, outdoor queues, movie queues, outdoor restaurants, and things like that, which was gratifying, except there was one place we couldn't do it. Guess where? The golf course. The golf men's lobby came and talked the council into allowing smoking on the golf course. But anyway, I guess I always felt a little unsuccessful because of changing careers. But looking back, I really think that it's wonderful to be able to experience multiple things like that. So I feel very fortunate. Thank you.
You know, before I talk about my own career, you made me think about something that my husband said to me not too long ago. I said, what was it like to be a white man in the late 50s and early 60s? And he said, no competition. No competition. And we were the no competition. We were the no competition. So when I graduated from college, I actually wanted to be a stewardess. I wanted to be a stewardess, I wanted to fly to France, and I wanted to fly to Rome, and I applied with United Airlines, and they turned me down flat. And as I was looking back and thinking about why that might have happened, I think it was really because I was too much of a feminist. They asked questions, and one of the questions was, well, probably your parents are really excited about getting these benefits, aren't they? And I said, my parents have nothing to do with this. And I could just see the form that said, snippy. But they did offer me a secretarial job, which I didn't consider for a moment. I took the really high-paying teaching job that was offered to me at Arlington High School, and I made $5,700 a year, and I thought I was rich. I thought I was rich. So I taught school in Illinois for 1 year, and it convinced me that I wasn't all that interested in being in the classroom, so I moved to California. I sold encyclopedias, door-to-door, World Book encyclopedias, and it was a good set, wasn't it? Yeah. And I did substitute teaching, so I sold encyclopedias door-to-door 3 days a week, and I did substitute teaching 2 days a week, and that was enough to pay my rent and do anything that I wanted to do. I lived on the beach in San Diego, and it was wonderful. And people, my son thinks I was a hippie, and I tell him I was the farthest thing from a hippie. I worked 5 days a week. I didn't do anything crazy. I never smoked marijuana. I didn't drink. I didn't do any of that stuff. And I was a virgin until I was 26. This part, I don't think he ever believed. Never. So I did that for a year, then I moved back to Chicago and got married to my college sweetheart, Russ Trinner. Taught school in Illinois for a couple of years. The marriage was not right. We broke up. I decided that I needed more money than I was making as a teacher. So I looked for another job, and I was very fortunate because I went to an outplacement counselor, and he said, all right, you can teach so you could train. You've had sales experience, such as it was. And you speak foreign languages. He said, let's find a company that puts all of those things together, and that's where you should be. So he sent me to Xerox, and Xerox had a learning systems division, which was an educational arm where you taught men, primarily, how to manage and how to sell. And it was really a great job. I was one of the first women hired to do this, and before I got a job as a salesperson, I was an instructor in the classroom. And I remember very vividly, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, Harbison Walker was one of the first groups who sent men to my class, and they were all middle-aged men, and they sold linings for refractories. And so I thought I was doing fine, and we were going, we were getting together, and everything was going right, and it was on time, and we took our first break, and we were walking down the hall together, and they went into the bathroom, and I walked right in there with them. I will never forget it. So then I had to go back and start the class again. But it was a wonderful job, really, and I was an instructor for them for several years, and then I moved into the role of a salesperson, and this is where I really found out that when you are a salesperson, there is no discrimination, because if you can sell, you can sell, and it's all about the numbers. So I sold for them for a number of years, had some really great experiences, learned a lot. I was recruited away by a Boston-based training company, And the president of that company really wanted to hire me, and so I was interviewing with some of the other senior executives there, and one of the men actually said to me in the interview, you know, our clients really don't like to work with women, and women don't do very well in our company. Well, I refused that job at that point, and several years later, most of their successful salespeople were women. And they were moving up in the organization. So I refused the job then. I moved to California, and as the regional manager for a company that did EEO and affirmative action training. And that was a great job, and I liked it very much until the political tides turned, and it was clear to me that that was not going to be the wave of the future for the next several years. So that Boston-based company approached me again and asked if I would open their West Coast office, and so I did, and I worked for them for several years, met my husband in that organization, and I worked there until 1982 when I had my one and only child. It was a great job. I handled our largest accounts domestically and internationally, so I handled Bank of America in San Francisco, and Manila, and in London, and Levi Strauss, domestically and internationally, so I traveled to Singapore and London and Manila and Hong Kong and Montreal and Paris, and it was really, really a good job. And that's also where I had an opportunity to use my French, because I taught some of those training programs that we did in French, which was kind of an out-of-body experience. You know, I'm doing this, and I'm standing back and saying, oh my God, I'm really doing it, which was really a lot of fun. In 1985, I had my one and only son. I'd done everything else in my life that I wanted to do except have a family and have a baby. So happily, I met my now husband, and he said being a father was the best thing I ever did, and I would love to do it again. So I was 41 and he was 51 when our one and only child was born, and he has been the light of my life. I quit work full-time when he was born, and ran my own training company until he was about 14. And in 2000, I hope this timing works out, in 2001, right after 9/11, I got a very nice job offer from Kaiser Permanente, which is a large healthcare organization in California. And I really didn't want a job, but it came right at the moment when I said, if this ever happens again, I don't want to be in some foreign country. So I took the job, and it turned out to be a terrific move. I loved the work, I loved the company, I loved the job. And I eventually convinced myself to retire in 2013. So for 6 months, from January 7th until May 30th, I played retired lady and joined the Rotary and volunteered with the Rose Club and did all kinds of volunteer work and just had a wonderful time. And then I got an invitation from an old Kaiser client to do an off-site, which means to take a management team out of the regular work for a day. And my son, who's an outdoor educator, and I had had this idea of combining his outdoor skills with my organization development talents. And so I said to this person, we have an idea, would you like to be our guinea pig? And she said, sure. So we took them out to a beautiful national park area. He taught them how to make a fire and how to read a compass and how to find food and water. And do you know what the best source of food is if you're ever lost in the wilderness? Any ideas? Bugs. Bugs. Grubs preferably, because they're both protein and fat. Who knew? Who knew? So we now do this with corporate and nonprofit teams. We've been doing it for 2 years and had a wonderful, wonderful time. And I feel so fortunate to have found something that allows me to be with my one and only son, have a really great time, and make a little money on the side.
I was a teacher, and I stayed with teaching, and I loved every minute of it, but you can see that I was impacted by what was happening. I'm sure we could talk about today's issues, but we are out of time. But it's important to realize that all these women faced wage issues, childcare issues, and for those of us who are women, and even our sons and son-in-laws, those are still real issues. So please, as we hear all the political nonsense about these issues, don't just sweep them under the rug. Think about these as impacting the lives of real people. It's time for us to leave, and we appreciate your coming. And sharing in their lives. I think it's a real tribute to a liberal arts education, which we all got here at the college. So thank you, girls, women, for sharing your stories. And thank you for coming.